Do you guys want to hear my Todd McFarlane story?
Let me ask you this. Let's make it about Skottie.
Okay, all right. I like that. I like where your head's at.
He pointed at you. It was good.
Head don't fuck around.
And I'm pointing at you, man, because you created a cottage industry at Marvel by doing the baby covers.
Sure.
Good question.
You know?
Yeah.
How did that even come about? Was it a lark to start, and then it just kind of caught on?
It was, yeah. We talked a little bit about this earlier. We talked about timing, right? Like things in life. I don't care about comics or music or family or whatever. Everything's timing. I did the cover that kind of kicked this whole thing off was an Avengers vs. X-Men wraparound cover for Avengers vs. X-Men #1. I drew like 30-some characters. They literally came to me. It was about 3 days before I was going to Germany. They were like, hey, could you do a wraparound cover for Midtown Comics? They wanted to do it in Marvel Baby style. I was like, all right. I mean, I'd done badges for Heroes Con in that style. And about 3 years prior, there was an X-Babies miniseries that they hired me to do the covers for, which I did. No one cared. That series came and went. It was fine, like whatever, but there was no fervor over it, no buzz. I did some badges for Heroes Con one year in that style. And then one of the guys up at Marvel was just like, George was like, oh, I like when Skottie draws it like this. And Midtown was like, hey, Skottie can do a cover ball. He's like, yeah, you guys should have him do X-Babies. So I did that as the wraparound cover. It blew up. Like, it was crazy. It added so many units of sales to that first issue that Marvel came, and again, timing. For whatever reason, 3 years prior, nobody cares. 3 years later, everybody cares. And Marvel's relaunching themselves for the first time in a long time. They're taking all their creators. It was the Marvel Now initiative, right? They're taking all the creators that have been writing certain books for a while, and they're switching them around. So Bendis is writing Avengers. He's moving off. You know, like they're just play musical chairs with the books. And so they came back to me and they were like, hey, could you do 5 covers? Or no, 10. I think it was 10. Like, could you do 10 #1s? And at that time, to get a job offer of 10 covers in one phone call, I was like, that's crazy. And not for one series. Like, it's different when you say, like, could you be the regular cover artist on a series? That's different. Because I've done that with like, Cable and Deadpool before. But I'd never just been offered 10 covers with various books. And I was like, no, okay. And that was 2012. And I'd do about 5 of those, and then they'd email me, can you do 5 more? We're launching 5 more books. Sure. So I'd get halfway through each assignment, and they'd just keep adding and adding up until the point where at one point I looked at my calendar, and I had at least 2 covers a week due for a full calendar year.
Oh, that's money. That's cool cash money, man.
You know what I mean? So all of a sudden, what I thought was a side hustle, 100% side hustle, I didn't realize that outside of my little world, that's all people knew me for now. Like that familiar. Yeah, that's what it was. They thought that was like so. So it's story to tell. This is how unaware I was of what it had meant to people. Was we're at a convention and somebody come up, ask for a sketch. I want Beast. I'm like, cool. I write it down. She comes to pick it up later. I draw her like a dope little 90s X-Men animated Beast style, you know what I'm talking about?
Where this is going.
You know what I'm saying? I hand her that Beast back, and she's like, thanks. And she walks off, and I was like, oh man, I have never seen anybody dislike my artwork so much in front of me and walk off so disappointed, right? And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to deal with that. I was like, God, that kind of hurt my feelings. Like, and I'm a pretty thick-skinned person. And it took me about an hour. And I was sitting there drawing and signing stuff. And then I realized, like, she only knew me. She had spent a year discovering me through these covers. And so when she asked for a Beast, she was waiting for, like, a cute little kid Beast. And I didn't know that that's what I was. I still thought I was 90s X-Men guy. Like, I still thought I was that guy to people, right? And so I realized at that point, and so now it's 2019, right? So this is 7 years later. I still have to ask at conventions when people say, like, oh, I want a Beast. I'm like, oh, regular or baby? because of that woman was so heartbroken.
You want that grandpa piece?
You want that old man piece? What you want, dog?
When I see the tattoos, man, that's a statement. And I see the Waterston, and we can make that connection sometimes when I see that ink line of yours, man.
Sure.
But I'm looking at that Alfred E. Newman.
Yeah.
And is it pure Mad Magazine inspiration, or was it Kelly Freas, the painter, who probably painted that piece?
No, it was definitely Mad Magazine. I was when I was in 4th grade, I got a paper route, right? And so I woke up at 4:30 every morning and put papers in a bag and rode my bike around town and delivered papers, which got me into comic strips. That's where I started to fall in love with comic strips. I didn't know what comic books were. My grandma bought me some Archie comic digest, right, from a garage sale or something, like a box of those, right? That was the close. I mean, obviously that's comics, but that's what I thought comics were. I don't even know if I heard the word yet at that age. But with that paper route money, me and my friend would always go up to, I lived in a small town. I grew up in a small town. It was like 3,000 people in the middle of Illinois. So it's in the middle of a cornfield, right? We had one grocery store. It's called Dave's, Dave's. It had a magazine rack. I was really into music. I was really into hip-hop music, and I was really into art. Those were my two loves. And so I would go up and I'd try to find hip-hop magazines, and I would try to find anything that looked like drawings were in it. And Mad Magazine was on that magazine shelf. And so I bought it once, and I was addicted. Like, I loved movies as well, right? And Mad Magazine always did movie spoofs.
Yeah, it was more Drucker joints.
Yeah, man. And I just fell in love with that stuff, right? So I was like, I draw, and look at all these drawings. I understand now that it was comics, but at the time I didn't know that, I didn't combine those two terms. This was just a magazine that had drawings in it. So I bought Mad Magazine, and then I subscribed to it, so it just gets mailed to my house. And all this is before I knew what superheroes were outside of movies, right? Like, I mean, obviously you grow up as a kid, you know who Superman is, you know who Batman is, but I didn't have any understanding of the comic book industry at large. It was really Archie, the comics in the newspaper, and Mad Magazine.
Where's the Archie tattoo?
I need to get that. I think that's
He's
coming
been
next.
talking about getting a tattoo like all day.
I know. I am. You know what? I think I'm gonna get an Archie tattoo this weekend.
8 hours ago.
So that Mad Magazine to me, this arm is literally going to be the stuff that built me.
That's awesome.
And Mad Magazine was my first love of comedy. I didn't even know that's why I loved it at the time. But any of my sense of humor, a lot of my cartooning, a lot of that stuff comes from that magazine. I subscribed to it. I loved it. I worshipped it. So from about 86 on, I got it every month. And it was my prized possession, man. We go to my grandma's on Sunday for like big family dinners, and I just take every Sunday I take as many as I could. And at the time I was like, we're going to draw, right? And my cousins were like, I guess. But I didn't realize, like, we all draw, right? Like, we all love drawing. And they were like, no, we all don't love it, dude.
Go back to your corner.
Yeah. But that's been a thing for me my whole life, where I was like, well, I like it, so you fucking love it, right? Like, you better fucking love it. Let's love it together. Just do it. So yeah, that's where that comes from. And it really is.
Bullied like one of your cousins into being a professional inker.
That would have been dope.
I'm bigger than you. Ink.
Yeah, ink right now. So yeah, it was definitely from the content in Mad Magazine. So over those years, I fell in love with Jack Davis, who I think is just one of the all-time great cartoonists of this world, man. Just a genius. And Sergio Aragonis is just bonkers, and just everything in that magazine, over at the time when I was young, I didn't even recognize their names. You're just soaking it in. You're just soaking in the content, which I love. I miss that purity. I miss the purity of not giving a fuck who did it or why they did it or any of the information behind it, right? It was just like, here's a product.
Or when you're like, Sergio Aragonis, this guy in this magazine looks like the dude from TV's Greatest Bloopers.
Yes! Yes! Exactly.
It's that kind of stuff that puts you on the hunt. And then when you make those correlations,
right,
whenever that
you're
stuff
like,
filters into...
That's the same dude?
Yeah,
right,
like,
exactly.
What's the story there?
Yeah.
That's just a natural process, though.
100%.
So what other inspirations are going to end up on that arm, man? What other things kind of shape?
Music for sure. I've been trying to figure out what symbol of music is going to be that for me, right? I mean, I grew up obviously in the era where cassette tapes were I mean, I know, you know, I think we're around the same age. We grew up in the cassette tape era, right? Like, and
Kind of thank you for that Shock G pinup and hip hop.
Absolutely, man. Digital Underground, fuck, man. Digital Underground. That album came out. I was 7th grade. I was in 7th grade when that album came out. I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I was in love with it. I could not stop listening to it. But I didn't realize that at 41, when I put that album in, it's as sonically relevant today as it was then. Because you can't say that about a lot of hip hop of that era is very stapled to that era, right?
Yeah, sure.
But there's really some fucking standouts, right? You put a Public Enemy album in your tape deck today from that era, and you're like, how the fuck did they get so ahead of their time, right? The Bomb Squad, like how that sound it sounded like it could be made today. But I argue that Digital Underground the Humpty Dance became so popular that I think people have rewritten history to be like, they were just a Humpty Dance. But
even if that was the only thing.
Well, it's amazing. But Shock G is a fucking absolutely dope producer that was, again, ahead of his time. He saw beyond where they were at the time. And when you listen to the grooves on that Sex Packet album, it's bonkers, man. It is absolutely bonkers. So I'm not beyond getting like a Humpty Hump tattoo.
Flavor Flav.
I got to. Flavor Flav would probably be Humpty more than Flavor. I loved Public Enemy, but I love Public Enemy. If I think back now, I love Public Enemy for their sound more than either one of those, right? Either one of the players there. It was more the production at the end of the day.
Flav comes with baggage.
Well, Flav, you got to deal with what he's become today a little bit, right? And so
that of love,
right? So that caused a little conflict in that kid version of me, right?
Yeah, I believe it was Patton Oswalt at the Flavor Flav roast who said the D in Chuck D stands for dignity.
I love it. Yeah. So at some point, the other thing is, so I haven't figured out what tattoo I'll get that represents that, because when I was a kid too. I fell in love with DJ culture, right? So I would take cardboard boxes and stab a pencil up through them, right? And I'd take 2 cardboard boxes and put a pencil and then put records on those, and just
that's amazing.
And then I would draw a little mixing stuff on a box in between.
Tell them the rental story.
Oh, God, right. Yeah, I've been a hustler for a while now. But I would sit there and I just put on my DJ Jazzy Jeff tape and sit on those cardboard boxes and just pretend that I was cutting it up. And I just thought, or I'd take my boombox and I would use the volume knob and just pretend that was a fader. And if I just cut it in, you know what I mean? And I did what you call stop mix tapes, right? Yeah. So when they finally came out. What is it? Yeah, pause tape. Yeah. We called them stop mix tapes. So it'd be like, I'd take all the scratches from shit and interlace them, and I make a mixtape, before I had turntables. But what Jason's talking about is, this is how music is such a big part of my life as much as art is. But we're old enough to remember when video stores first came, video rental stores came about, right? VCRs. And I was like, oh man, that's a dope concept, right? So I was in elementary school. I was like, I got a lot of music. I spent all my paper route money on Mad Magazine and cassette tapes. So I was like, this rental thing's pretty fucking dope. And so remember back then when they had the cassette tape cases, right? They look like a briefcase, like a brown little briefcase. So I would take that to school, and then I put a list of all the tapes that I had available. I taped it on the side of my desk, and motherfuckers could rent my tapes.
Oh, that's sick.
My cassette tapes. So but it wasn't just music I liked. So I was like, I would get Bullet Boys. You could rent the Bullet Boys tape, Smooth Up in You.
I love the idea of you, bigger than everyone, going to beat somebody up. I'm gonna break your legs. You don't bring my EPMD back.
You better bring that EPMD back, dog. I don't know. You had the EPMD for 4 days. You rented it for 2. So that was my first real business hustle on my own. Was renting out my cassette tapes. Yeah. So at some point, something musically will be on here. I don't know what it is yet.
Can we talk Fairyland?
Let's do it.
Was it first the Free Comic Book Day comic? Is that the first iteration that people saw?
Oh no. That was maybe a year and a half in, maybe. Yeah, it was a while. It was after it already had been working. they had come to me and Image wanted to do, because most of the time Free Comic Book Day comics are like, oh, a 10-pager, or it's a collection of 4 pages or whatever. And Image was like, hey, we're thinking about like giving like a full legit comic out this year. Would you want to do a Fairland one? But like, I hate Image. I was like, well, yeah, sure, that'd be cool. But I was like, you guys got to make sure that everybody's fine with it, right? Like, I don't want to be doing this like...
I'm still not alright with it.
I did kill these motherfuckers.
Yeah, you cut some promos in there.
Yeah. But my thing was I needed to make sure that everybody was okay with it because I didn't want to do this, legal dance between the raindrops thing afterwards. Like, make sure, just tell me everybody who signed on. Give me a list of everybody who's fair game. And then I'm just going to have some fun, right? And I'm an Image kid. I grew up in the Image Comics days. So, ultimately, at the end, I was going to kill all the Image partners. Which is great because there's a dude who bought the whole issue of original art. He bought all the pages. And the page where I kill all the original Image partners, he's now got all of their signatures on that page. But he was lacking Mark Silvestri. He came up to me at C2E2 and he was like, Mark, he's from Mexico, and he's like, Mark Silvestri's the last person on here, and he's here, but his line's too long. And I didn't get a ticket or whatever. I was like, nah, that's not okay. So I just took the page, walked over. I was like, Mark, you got to hook my man up. So he got that last signature on that. It was pretty cool. So yeah, no, that was about a year and a half into the series being on shelves.
You said you're an Image dude. How do you get from Mad to Image?
It was growing up drawing, you're just constantly looking for that next thing, right? So for me, it was like Mad Magazine, and then closer to junior high, hip hop had become such a main focus of my life, and especially that era, right? Like late 80s, early 90s, hip hop and art were really like hand in hand. And there was a lot of comic book crossover, right? You heard a lot of comic book references happening in hip hop. And so there was just a natural progression to finding something else that was art based. And one of my friends, I went with one of my friends, and he was deciding to go to a comic book shop, and we were at a mall, and there was like a comic book shop in a mall, and we went in it. And my friend knew more about comics. I didn't know anything about comics, and we went in and he started grabbing some stuff, and it just happened to be at the time the Image was launching, so there was like number ones. And I remember, I had been given comics books before, but I didn't ever understand it because it was like, here's Daredevil 238 or whatever, right? And you're like, I don't understand anything that's happening here. But then Image, I was like, number one, I understand that. This is the first. And so we just happened to be in there at the time where they all were launching. And so we grabbed them. And then it was more of a community thing. So it was like me and a couple buddies. And so it was like, I don't know that this is my thing, but we're all doing this. So I'll read it and you'll read it and you'll read it. And then we started finding our own, right? And then Death of Superman happened at the same time. So it was all these kind of big things popping off right there at a time where I was trying to discover something new that connected with this other hobby of mine that wasn't music, and it was art. And then Spawn number 1 had come out, and I bought that, and I fell in love with that, man. I was in love with Spawn. That's one of the things I will never trash Spawn, man. I know it's kind of a hot topic. You're like, Spawn's funny. I'm like, nope. That's a dope ass comic book.
Yeah, I don't get down with that irony shit myself. And we have a friend who, no joke, damn near won a Pulitzer Prize. And, he had to, wean himself off in the hundreds.
Yeah.
And he kept it low key, too, man. He might have got kicked out of Washington, D.C. for
that. Yeah, man. Well, we were talking earlier, too, because it was like, Todd didn't draw near as much as Spawn as everybody thinks he did, right?
That's true.
He did the beginning, and then Tony Daniels came in. But then, man, when Greg Capullo comes in, anybody who goes back right now, I want to hear anybody who makes fun of Spawn right now. Go back and you look at Greg Capullo issues, and you tell me you're not watching a master cartoonist. A master cartoonist at his craft.
Todd McFarlane is touching those pages too, man. So it's
crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and people they kind of erase history. That book was in the top 10 of sales forever, long past its popularity, right? Like when people thought it was big, but then like into the time where people are starting to clown on it.
Hey, it made so much money. He gonna pay us for talking about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like he's probably texting me right now. Like, he's texting me right now.
Venmoing you right now.
Do you guys want to hear my Todd McFarlane story?
All of them.
All right. My first Todd McFarlane story. It was great. I was at my studio. It was the year that I had done Rocket Raccoon, right? And we sold like 400,000 copies of number one. It was crazy. All of a sudden, my phone rang one day at the studio, and he was like, "Can I talk to the world famous Skottie Young?" I was like, "Yeah, this is him." And he goes, "Well, this is Todd McFarlane from Phoenix, bud." And I was like, first of all, I actually was like, all right, good one, Otley, because Ryan Otley does the best Todd McFarlane the best Todd McFarlane impression you're ever going to hear is Ryan Otley. I totally thought I was getting clowned by Otley, and no, it was absolutely Todd McFarlane. And the thing that I will always remember that phone call because I had never in my life been called by somebody who told me where they were calling from. Because he said, "This is Tom McFarlane from Phoenix." And I was like, I used to draw Spawn in all my notebooks, and now my childhood hero just told me where he's calling from. And I was like, and then I ended up having about a 3-hour phone conversation with him that day about various things.
Yeah.
And, he was offering me a cover and doing this and that and whatever. And then he was just dropping all, he was doing that old school thing that you would hear him in Liefeld tell. Here's what you got to do, and now you got to do this, and you blah 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 blah. I'm gonna do this, but then you got to do this. And I was like, I don't know how much of this I'm gonna listen to, but I'm gonna tell you what, I'm gonna soak it all in, because if I could go back and tell the 15-year-old me that I just got a phone call out of the blue from Tom McFarlane, I would lose my shit.
Yeah, I'm just making notes right here, man. So 400K is the threshold for when the
you get a call from Phoenix.
Tom McFarlane from Phoenix.
This is Tom McFarlane from Phoenix, bud.
Currently in the Vancouver airport.
Yeah.
Your first professional gigs. How did these things come about?
Oh man.
Did you go the traditional route? Was it like submitting stuff?
No.
Getting portfolio reviews at cons and shit?
No, it's super not near as romantic as that. This is one of those stories that like you either love it or you hate it, right? Because of like there's the side that's like we grinded, right? We did the samples and we did the things and we went to the conventions. And again, I assume that we're all in here like around the 40-year-old zone, right? We're in that zone. So we all come from that same place where it's like internet was barely a baby when we all were trying to break in. So that wasn't really an avenue. Mine was like right place, right time, fall backwards ass into it, right? Me and my current, who is my wife, my current wife, like I've had a couple. We've lived together for 19 years. She's my, Casey and I had just moved to Chicago, and we were both waiting tables. I was DJing a little bit here and there, and I went to the comic book shop one day, and I was just like, you try to do that thing like I draw. You try to tell the comic, you don't even know what you're trying to get out of it. You're just trying to express to somebody that you like drawing. And it happened to be Patrick Brower, who owns Challengers now, right? He worked at Graham Crackers back in the day. And he was like, oh, cool, I ink and blah, blah, blah. And then I happened to be up there at the time where his name was Joe Curry. And he was an indie publisher, like he was self-published in Chicago. And he's like, Joe publishes comic books, well, you guys will get along. And Joe was into hip-hop, and his comics were very Chicago-centric and hip-hop-centric. And so we clicked right away, and I showed him some of my samples. I mean, my artwork was literally like, here's some graffiti, some toy-ass graffiti, by the way, right? Like, here's my graffiti, and here's my skate stuff, because I was a skater, and just illustrations, no comic book work, like no pages. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't even know how to do that. And he was like, cool, you want to draw this book? I was like, yes! Right? So I was just like, cool, I'll do the indie book. And it wasn't even about making money. I was like, cool, we're going to make a comic book. And he was like, oh, well, Wizard World Chicago's coming up in a month or whatever. you like do like a poster, like a coming soon for this book or whatever. So I did. And I remember meeting a friend that like lived in an apartment building next to mine, and he had Photoshop, this fucking Phantom program. You know, he had his own computer. I was like, whoa, you're so rich.
I remember those days. Shit.
Yeah, I know, right? And so I like did my drawing. I was like, I don't know how you get in this computer, but here's the drawing. And he put it in, he colored it up. So we went out to Wizard World Chicago early when Wizard took it over. We're sitting at the table. We had that poster printed up. I had my portfolio there. They let me sit behind the table. It was my first time ever sitting behind a table. I had a giant ass. I didn't go to art school or college, by the way, but I had one of those giant ass fucking art school portfolios, right? Where you just see motherfuckers like it's like some sort of fucking attache, right? It's just fucking, and it was just filled with, like I said, like skate art and graffiti and no comic book pages whatsoever. And I smoked back then, so I went out to smoke a cigarette, and I came back, and Joe was like, dude, somebody from Image came by, left a card. And I was like, what? Somebody from Image? He was like, yeah, Image Comics. Somebody from Image Comics left the card. Here, he handed me the card. And all of a sudden in my mind, he was like,
card to get.
I know, right? But not at this age.
Yeah.
At this age, I was like, all of a sudden I'm thinking like, oh shit, I'm so rich now. like, right? Because all I know about Image is Todd McFarlane and Spawn and Wildcats and Jim Lee. And I just think somebody from Image just left me the card. I'm so rich. Like, I'm got ready to buy a castle.
There was the Entertainment Weekly article that my parents saw that made it so okay for me to grow up to be a cartoonist. It was Chap Yap, and it said something about like rookie cartoonist. It said something like rookie cartoonist due to make $250,000 this year or some shit like that.
Right.
And he was 19 years old.
Yeah.
In the article. So,
right.
So my folks became like stage parents for comic books.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. So I think this guy left me his card, and I'm gonna call him after the convention, and it's gonna be on, right? Like I'm gonna have my Spawn. It's gonna be amazing. So I go back home. I wait till Monday, and I lived in Chicago at the time, so Chicago was World. I just went home. The person who left me the card is CB Cebulski, right?
Yes.
But this is when CB just left CP. I think it's CPM Manga. It's a manga company. And this is also the era where Image is now letting everybody set up their own little shops, right? Like everybody has a studio. Dreamwave's there, like
that era.
Everybody's they're trying to figure out, because Image was at a real low, so they're like, everybody can have their own little studios here now. And CB was bringing over Kia Asamiya, and he had a book with I think Takeshi, and there was a couple different books that he was trying to, but he also was just trying to find young cartoonists and develop some books and get some Image books and get a little studio going. It was called Fanboy Entertainment or Fanboy Inc. So over the course of that next year, CB and I became friends, and we developed some books, and we pitched some books to Image. We got one greenlit, and at the same time, he started talking with Marvel editors, and because he was good at discovering and finding young talent, he back when the word Rolodex actually meant a thing, they were like, oh, this dude has like a pretty deep Rolodex because he's been in the manga industry. And you guys got to remember, everybody remember, the early 2000s, the manga industry started devouring the bookstore market, right? So everybody was trying to figure out how to tap into that. So you had Viz Media and all these books that are just taking over Borders and Barnes & Noble. So Marvel was like, how do we get a piece of this? Here's this guy who has his finger on that pulse, and he's, a lot of American artists who are in that world. Meanwhile, I have no idea what manga is. Right? I've never read a manga book at this time. I saw like Akira when I was in high school, right? When I was like high and skating. So CB and I become friends. We get a book, greenlit Image, but right at the same time, he's got a thing going at Marvel where he's writing some Mangaverse stuff. And then he calls me one day. He was like, oh, fuck. I was out drinking with Mike Martz last night, and they were like, Carl Kerschel. This is weird, right? Because later in life, like, all of us are people, right? Like, we're all doing books now. But back in the day, we're all breaking in. So Carl was doing an Iceman series, which I didn't know him at the time. And they were like, you're going to get a call from Mike Martz. He's in the X office. He's going to offer you a book, but just act surprised. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm fairly sure I don't have to act. I will be surprised, right? Because I'm living in a fucking roach-infested apartment in Chicago with my lady. And he just happened to be out, and a person, Carl couldn't do an issue. Something had happened with his family or whatever, and so they just needed somebody who could turn around an issue really fast. And he had called me and said, it was like a 3-week turnaround, 4-week turnaround total. And they called me, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, that's not a problem. I will for sure do that. It's Iceman number 3. I hung up the phone. I had never drawn a comic book before. I maybe had done 3 sample pages in my life. They were terrible. Absolutely fake it till you make it. My whole jam, right? Like good in a room, just good in a room, right? Like, and so yeah, they offered me that job. I did that. I had my homie Greg Titus. He took a bus in from Boston. He was a much better artist than me at the time, but a good inker as well. So he came in to help me do some backgrounds and ink because we had to do this thing so fast. So he did backgrounds and he inked Iceman number 3. That was my first comic book I ever drew was at Marvel.
We're gonna seek that comic out tomorrow at the
yeah, man. Yeah, dude.
If you have me.
Yeah.
That thing's been slabbed 1,000 times over.
Yeah, man. And to my wife's credit, she picked up all my shifts at Ed DeBevick's. I don't know if you guys know what Ed DeBevick's is, but it was like a 50s, 60s style diner where you're mean to people. Like you dressed up as shit, you danced on a counter.
So it's
I've
like
been to one of those things with a family reunion, and my uncle almost popped the dude in the jaw.
Yeah.
Fancy dicks.
Yeah, fancy dicks. It's more acting dicks. So Casey picked up all my shifts that month. She worked her shifts and my shifts at the restaurant that month. And after that, I still kept the job. I still worked at the restaurant. And it was about 6 months later, then CB got hired on as an editor. And he put together a Spider-Man project, a Spider-Man miniseries, and he brought me on to draw that. And again, right place, right time type of situation, right? Like I did that Spider-Man miniseries. They were chasing that manga game, which they just thought was cartoony. I was a cartoony guy. And then they launched a Human Torch book. They brought me over to that, which I just did a podcast with Joe Quesada a couple weeks ago where I was like, oh, Joe, man, I remember seeing in print and previews, you called me a future superstar. And I was just like, yes! But yeah, so it's like, it just ended up being like one of those things where I fell into a thing, and I say it's like, somebody says, actually CB said one time, like breaking into comics is like breaking out of prison. Like once you find a way, they close that way, and then you gotta find another way. I don't like that metaphor, okay, but I've edited it, which is like, I don't think it's like breaking out of prison. I think breaking into comics is like breaking out of prison. That's not the hard part. We all understand how to climb a fence. And I could probably not get cut by the barbed wire at the top, right? I can figure that out. The hardest part is staying out of prison, right? You got to find a new life, right? You got to get credit cards. Like, how do you do it? How do you stay out? And how do you stay out forever? That's comic books. Comic books is breaking out of prison and figuring out how to fucking stay out, right? Like, everybody's always like, how'd you break into comics? Like, why are you asking that question? That's easy. Draw a comic book and then get somebody to like it. The hardest part of comic books is staying the fuck in it, right? Like, how do you keep doing it? How do you, like, especially if you're doing the rat race of, like, the Marvel or DC jam, right? Where you're like, I'm going to do this 5-issue series. But about issue 2, you understand your job's almost done. Or when you're halfway through issue 3, you're like, I'm about unemployed. I don't know what to do next. How do I stay out of prison? And so that's what it became. So it just became like a crazy hustle, which, we're here at Heroes Con in a hotel room at a convention. That's actually what became like the craziest supplemental thing for me is like, once I realized like I could stop depending on companies to give me a job to bridge everything, because there was this other thing that we could go and start like just connecting with people one-on-one, it changed my whole life.
Your line is never small at these festivals, man. And fairly recently, you added a new dimension to your practice by writing books.
Right.
Explain that evolution, man. Like,
that really comes down to, that goes back to image, man. Like, I thought, when I discovered comics, I discovered superhero comics and all the like comic books, right, at the time that Image launched. So I just thought, just made everything up yourself. I didn't think that it was about, I didn't ever think I want to draw Spider-Man. I thought somebody had that job. Like, you don't reach for a job that somebody has. You make a thing up. And that's what I thought comics were. And then I fell, the story that you just heard, that was an accident. Like, I fell into that. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm still doing this. But my heart was always like, cool. Like, I'm not kidding you. Like, my second series was Human Torch. And even on that one, I was, like, talking to my friends, like, okay, what's this creator-owned thing I'm going to do after this? Like, that's what I thought I was supposed to be doing. So I was going to do this in the meantime while I was going to figure out this creator-owned stuff. So the desire to write and create stories was there from the beginning. But I just fell into the machine of making stuff. And I mean, at some point you're like, I got to pay my rent, right? And you're like, well, this is working well. And then you just fall into that.
You're already paying it, which a lot of people at your age,
right,
at that time, would have been like, fucking kill to pay my rent drawing comics.
Right. So yeah, because it's working, it's like it's hard to jump off the ship for something you're unsure of. And again, everybody can remember this is the early 2000s was not Image's heyday.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? I mean, we all remember like The Walking Dead started there, but The Walking Dead did not come out swinging. That was hindsight, right? So there was a real over the years when I started to. At first, I was just a penciler, and then I was like, well, I want to eat myself too. And then eventually, I was like, well, I'd kind of like to just color myself too and do my own covers as well. And like, you just wanted like, this is what I really wanted to do. So, and I don't know if it was arrogance or ignorance or what.
Hip hop bravado.
Right. I don't know what it was, but I just felt like I never was embarrassed to ask because the worst thing you could say is no. I wanted it. I'm going to ask for it, and almost every single time
that simple.
It was always that simple.
I had to trick them.
It was no. I literally was like, can I just do my own covers? Yeah, sure. Can I ink and color them too? All right. It was like a weird thing, right? So one time I got an offer. John Barber called me, an editor at Marvel, and was like, "Hey, we're gonna do these Marvel. It's like a Halloween, like a 5th week event, right? We're gonna do these Marvel monster books, and it's gonna be like 2 stories per book or whatever." You're the first person we're coming to, so which one if you want to do it, just pick which one you want to draw. I was like, oh, you guys used to do those old Bernie Wrightson Monster Frankenstein books. That was pretty dope, right? And I was like, I'd like to do a Monster Frankenstein one, but can I write it? And John Barr was like, yeah, sure, just don't fuck it up. Like, it was that easy. And that was because I was just like, I want a new challenge. Like, part of what we do, I think, is like we're challenging ourselves, right? Like, we sit down with a blank piece of paper and we're going to make it into something. That's a fucking challenge. That's a weird puzzle. And at some point, whether or not you're perfect at it or not, you do feel like, well, I'm kind of getting tired of solving this puzzle. I need a new version of this puzzle to solve. And so it got to that place where I was like, okay, I'd like to throw myself into scary waters of writing. And so I asked for the Frankenstein story. And then I got it and I was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here, right? And I thumbnailed it out. I didn't write it, and I thumbnailed it out. But they liked it. They were like, fuck, this is pretty good. It was like a 14-page little Frankenstein story. They really dug it. So, again, around the time, we kept having, like, big events, right? Big X-Men events and whatever. So each time they'd have an X-Men event or a big Marvel event, at the end they would do, like, an anthology with short stories that kind of were, like, ancillary to that event. So, like, let's say, there was one big X event where I had drawn the new X-Men characters in the regular series, and after the event, they offered me a little story to write, and I was like, cool, I'd like to write a Noli story. And he's like this little, like, lizard kid. He's gay, and at the time, it was like they're blowing up the X-Mansion every 6 days, and he's just ready to... Right, and he was just ready to quit. And so they send North Star, another gay character to talk to him, and it was just my story that I chose, and I was like, I just wanted to tell the story. It was like, Anoli's like, what do you think I'm going to listen? Like, is that what they think of me? Like, I'm a young gay kid, so they're going to send the old gay guy to talk to me, like, oh, cool, yes, I'll do whatever you say. And it was and they were like, wow, I wouldn't have thought about that angle. Like, I thought you would just do some power shooty stuff, but I was like, no, like. I think the X-Men stories have always bugged me because you guys don't really lean into the fact that these are fucking kids at school. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we always look at the X-Men, like, they're men. Like, these are men and women, but, like, I love the aspect of X-Men as being, like, kid weirdos at school. And, like, they're wondering why adults are using them as the tip of their sword all the time. Like, they're kids. We shouldn't be throwing them at the front of a war. And so I told a story like that, and they were like, God, that's a good angle. And so from that, it started to lead to more projects, and I did a Magneto miniseries. And the thing that I really enjoyed about it, so I just kept taking these different pieces and different projects at Marvel. So in a lot of ways, I was just asking them to pay me to learn how to do this, right?
That's the weirdest thing, man. Like, they teach you to become a better cartoonist, especially if you do every aspect yourself. It's like they're paying and giving you superpowers that you could then take to Image and
Absolutely.
And do your own thing,
Absolutely.
and build an audience in their house.
100%. They literally are paying you to go to college, to their own college, and all, at the same time, like, learn the business, right? You're learning the marketing side. You're learning how it really works, right? Because a lot of times you hear the commentary on this stuff, and you're like, oh man, I get where you're coming from, but you're super wrong. I mean, this isn't even an opinion-based thing. This is just straight metrics. Like,
sure, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so on the writing thing, it just became like, all right, like, make mistakes here, and get some cool notes here, and then by the time, and then the Oz book came around, and I did those for about 5 years, and they were really successful. And so after that, I got a lot more leeway to be, when we were done with that, I was able to say, like, cool, whatever I do next, I'm going to write and draw. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, it's not going to be a 4-pager, it's going to be a 5-pager or a mini-series. It's just going to be like, whatever I do from now on, either I write or I write and draw it. And I'm like, cool. And so that's when we did Rocket Raccoon. I pitched that. At first, they wanted me to come on and do Guardians of the Galaxy with Brian Bendis. They wanted me to do a run with him, which I think anybody would be like, yup, hard in. But I was like, nah, that doesn't make sense for me. Like, I'd be following Steve McNiven and Sarah Pichelli. Those two, I mean, they're amazing. And this isn't about, like, they're better than me or I'm better than, that's not what I mean. I'm saying, like, they fit that, and that's not me. It was the first kind of zen moment I had with comics, which we realized, like, my goal isn't to do the top book. My goal is to do my books. Whether it's my books that I own or the books that I do at Marvel, they always need to be what fit me the most, not what is the career choice, right? Like, I don't need to draw Avengers. That's not me, right? I will never write and draw Avengers. It's not my jam. I'm a Deadpool guy. Like, that's me. And so that's where the writing started coming out. And of course, just like anything, and Jason earlier made some references. I grew up playing basketball as well, and my analogy is always free throws, right? My dad, I grew up in Central Illinois in the era of the Bulls, right? So we were like Texas is to football in small towns, right? We were basketball like small basketball towns. So I couldn't come inside until I hit 50 free throws, right? So every day I had to make 50 free throws. At first it was horribly impossible, but over the years it just became like I could look. I didn't even have to look at the basket. We could just talk, and I could just hit them because your muscles just understand where the things are, right? Like, over time you've learned it, and that's what I started to feel the comfort level of the writing, which is when I was finally able to be like, Marvel was, they taught me all the skill set. Like, they taught me they showed me all the traffic cones, they showed me all the hardships, to the point where I could then start going to Image and really just doing a thing all on my own, and having that confidence and having that flavor to where, like, I Hate Fairyland I wrote and drew, but like Middle West, right? Middle West and Bully Wars are books that I just wrote, and having that confidence to collaborate with other artists is pretty amazing.
And this is the first time, like, Middle West, the first time you wrote for someone else?
No, I know I did a Magneto miniseries that I wrote for somebody else back in 2012, Playman, 2011 maybe. 2011 actually, because my dad passed away in the middle of that series. Rocket Raccoon I wrote and drew, but eventually I had to move off that to do another project. So then I stayed on that for about a year and a half past me drawing it.
Right,
and so I would bring on artists and do that. Middle West and Bully Wars, I brought on other people. Deadpool, I never drew. I've been writing that for Nick Klein and Scott Hepburn. So yeah, it's been a mixed bag for there. But the first time I wrote for somebody else was with Clay. No, I'm wrong. My first time I wrote for somebody was Dan Panosian on a Juggernaut story, and he will credit me, which is so bizarre, but he was like, "You're the reason I draw interiors now." I was out, and then I loved his artwork online, and I had a Juggernaut story in one of those X-Men anthologies, and I was like, because I love Jack Davis, and clearly Dan loves Jack Davis, right? Like there's such a DNA there. I was like, "Oh man, you should come. Would you do like a Juggernaut story with me?" And he was like, "Oh, cool." And like then all of a sudden he's been doing interiors ever since, which I didn't realize that at the time. Like I think it's super weird that he says any of that. But so that was my first time writing for somebody else, which I really love. Like I'll be honest, I never felt the collaboration bug as an artist. Like I never felt it. Like it never sunk in me. I always felt like I was doing something that wasn't mine, and most of the time just like I would maybe do this different, or like it just didn't feel complete. It was dissing what they did. It just didn't feel. I just felt like I was doing a job. But on the writing side, for other artists, I feel so the opposite. Like
interesting.
It's such a weird like. I have this vision in my head because I'm an artist. And I know what I'm putting down on the script, and then when you give it back to me, it's like, oh, it's not what I saw, but it's so fucking cool, you know? Yeah.
What's happening nowadays?
Right now we're doing, I'm still doing Middle West with Jorge Corona, which is a super personal story. It's my first kind of big, I've been used to doing kind of one and dones and old school kind of comics, right? Where you just kind of read it month to month, and this is my first kind of big scope story, and it's super personal. There's a lot of like my real life in there, and Jorge is killing that. And we were nominated for some Eisners for that this year, which is awesome. And I finished up Bully Wars with Aaron Conley, which is another really fun story that I've been wanting to tell for a long time. I just wrapped up my run on Deadpool, so I did about 1.5 years on Deadpool, which I'm really, really proud of. And my next series at Marvel, I can't say what it is, but it is I am writing a new series, creating a new series from the ground up.
What did you say it was again?
Nice try. But I will tell you who's drawing it, and it's one of my
Speedballs.
Speedballs, yes. One of my high school idols. One of my idols. One of my idols when I was in high school, Humberto Ramos is drawing it.
Oh yeah.
So I literally get to we just went to New Orleans for a research trip. Me and the editors and Humberto and my wife came to. She's a photographer, so she came and shot it and referenced and stuff. And
that's awesome.
I'm writing a book for somebody who I carried around like artwork in my wallet when I was in high school. So I'm like, it's one of those like for real pinch me moments. Like I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah, that's a dream, man. You going on those research trips that are keep the receipt.
Yeah,
yeah. Write that stuff off.
Yeah, we're like rolling around in New Orleans with my hero, my childhood hero, who we've become friends over the years. But I never in a million years would think that we'd be collaborating together on a book, and just like talking about character designs and locations and things. It's amazing. It's like real nerd moment.
Has he been dropping some science, man? Pretty educational.
So awesome, dude. Yeah, it's so amazing.
Super cool, man.
Yeah,
Listen, dude. Drop a plug to the audience. Like, where can they find your stuff? SkottieYoung.com, at Skottie Young on Instagram. I think it's the same thing on Twitter. I don't use Twitter that much anymore. Instagram's usually where I'm at most of the time. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So check out new stuff coming from Marvel this year. New, Middle West is still going. I got a new project that I'm cooking up with Kyle Strom. Okay.
Other than that, yeah, just having fun making comics.
Cool. Well, Skottie, listen, man, it's the day before Heroes Con even began, and we're up way past our bedtime.
Way past our bedtime.
We're
gonna do pinkies out real quick.
In hip hop parlance, this will sound like a pause moment, but it's time to go to bed.